Dear students, continuing our discussions on ecological modernization theory, in today's class we will discuss different perspectives and applications of ecological modernization theory. In the previous class we have already discussed the basic concept of ecological modernization, and we have also discussed the major criticisms against ecological modernization theory. So in today's class let us discuss that how we can employ, how we can use ecological modernization theory to understand the social world or to understand the process of social change. The basic objective of today's class is to examine the ecological modernization process or ecological modernization theory as a prospective theory to understand social change. So in a sense, in today's class we will discuss how can we understand, how can we apply ecological modernization to make a sense of societal change that is taking place in the contemporary times. After successfully completing this module, you will be able to apply the concept of ecological modernization to examine the process of societal change occurring due to the advanced modernity, and you will also be able to understand the societal response and societal reactions to the process of ecological modernization. You will also be able to understand the state and society's response and reactions towards ecological crisis. So in this class we will discuss basically two major themes. To begin with, we will discuss multiple perspectives and applications of ecological modernization theory, and in the second part we will discuss ecological modernization as a prospective social theory. So where we will discuss that how ecological modernization is grounded in the larger context of societal theory and how it examines the process of social change from one generation, or we will examine the process of social change as it unfolds because of the emerging ecological crisis. Okay, let's begin with the first part of today's class, that is multiple perspectives and applications of ecological modernization theory. There are two unique aspects of ecological modernization theory. Before we try to understand what are the ways in which you can apply ecological modernization theory, let us understand there are two important unique points, unique points about ecological modernization theory. To begin with, you may say that ecological modernization theory revolves around the theme that political processes and practices are critical in enabling ecological phenomena to be integrated into the modernization process. Or in other words, ecological modernization theory basically revolves around the concept that the state, the political processes has to be integrated. The political processes are critical or they are important in integrating the process of ecological phenomenon or the ecological consciousness to that of modernization process. So in the sense that the ecological switchover will take place or ecological modernization will evolve or will emerge only when certain changes are brought forward in the central institutions like that of state. So in that sense, what is important, what is central about ecological modernization theory is that it is the state, the political processes and political activities, they are central, they are critical, they are important in integrating ecological consciousness, in integrating ecological phenomenon to that of the process of modernity. So in that sense, modernity achieves a new status, modernity achieves a new stage only with certain central changes or only with certain changes in the central institutions of state and governance. Secondly, the second important point about ecological modernization theory is that it brings interrelated ideas from political theory to sociological understanding of synergies between state, society, environment and economy. So in other words, ecological modernization theory is not just an examination of the production process, it is not just an examination of the industry or the modernization process, it is a process, it is a theory which tries to synergize, which tries to combine or which tries to understand social reality by looking at the synergies between the state, the society, the environment and economy. So in other words, ecological modernization theory tries to propagate a model where ecological consciousness or where environmental improvements can be brought forward only with certain societal, institutional and governance changes. So in that sense, these are the two major contributions of ecological modernization theory towards understanding societal change or towards understanding societal progress, that it is not just a theory which examines the modernization process, which examines the process of production. It is a theory which understands the synergies between state, economy of state, private, environment and the society. So in other words, ecological modernization theory tries to develop a synergy between these four important elements: the state, society, environment and economy. So now let's discuss that how ecological modernization theory can be applied in while doing research or while trying to understand or make a sense of the social world or social reality. How can we apply or how can we make use of ecological modernization theory? To begin with, let's be clear that ecological modernization theory is a school of thought in larger sociological theory. It is a specific thought, or it is a specific school of thought in the larger sociological theory, larger societal theory, and especially or following the works of important sociologists like Joseph Huber, Martin Jennings, A.P.J. Moll, and Gert Spargeren. Ecological modernization has emerged as an important perspective to understand the social reality, especially in the wake of the emerging ecological crisis. In that sense, ecological modernization theory is a social theory. It is a process to understand. It is a theory to understand the process of societal change as society moves on from simple modernity to that of an advanced modernity. So with increasing modernization, with increasing industrialization, how the society deals with or how the society handles these kind of environmental problems. In that sense, ecological modernization theory is a social theory. We will have a detailed discussion what are the different elements of the social theory. So as a social theory, ecological modernization basically tries to understand how modern societies or advanced modern societies tackle with, or how do they deal with, how do they cope with the emerging ecological crisis, and in that sense how these kind of ecological modernization are different from that of industrial modernization or simple modernization. In that sense, as a social theory, ecological modernization tries to see the transformation of society from that of a simple industrial modernity to that of an advanced ecological modernity. And again, if we can go back to Joseph Huber's classification, that where he classified that societies can be societal progress or societal evolution can be understood through three phases. One is which Huber says that ecological that the industrial breakthrough, the second constitution of industrial society, and the third ecological switchover or ecological modernization. So when ecological switchover takes place, or when a society transforms into an ecological modern stage, certain changes are required, certain changes are demanded from that of state, from that of governance, or from that of industry also. So in that sense, ecological modernization theory as a social theory tries to comprehend that how society transforms from that of a simple industrial modernity to that of an advanced ecological modernity. The second way in which you can understand applications of ecological modernization theory is that as a notion for depicting the prevailing discourse of environmental policy, especially if we look at sociological works of if you can look at the sociological works of Martin Hager. Hager implies ecological modernization theory, or Hager uses ecological modernization theory to understand the policy changes or the environmental policy changes in Britain, where Hager comes to the conclusion that ecological modernization is used, or it is described as a dominant discourse to make environmental policy or to design environmental policy. In that sense, Hager's focus is to understand how ecological modernization is used as a dominant discourse. Ecological modernization is a discourse, and using ecological modernization as a discourse, using ecological modernization as a narrative, certain policies are put forth, certain policies are implemented. So in that sense, we can understand that ecological modernization becomes a discourse, it becomes a narrative, and the state uses this narrative, the state uses this ecological modernization as a narrative, as a discourse to claim certain kinds of environmental policies. Like we have discussed in the previous class, that ecological modernization is always pro-capitalist theory, it is a pro-industrialist theory. Ecological modernization doesn't find any problem with the process of modernity. In that sense, it argues for advanced modernity. In that sense, it argues for super-industrialization. So these narratives of super-industrialization, these narratives of advanced modernity is used by the state to put forth or to come out with specific kind of environmental policies. So Hager's work basically identifies ecological modernization as a discourse with which certain policy frameworks are put forth by the state. The third way in which we can understand application of ecological modernization theory is that is as a synonym for strategic environmental management and eco-restructuring. If you can recall again in my previous class, I have told that ecological modernization theory is not just a theory, it is also a political agenda. It is also a political agenda for action. In that sense, ecological modernization is used as a synonym, it is used as a process for strategic environmental management. Because with ecological modernization, what is emphasized is the right management of environment. It is through right management of through different kind of policies, through different kind of environmental regulations, that ecological improvement or environmental improvement can brought forward. In that sense, ecological modernization becomes a tool for managing the nature. Ecological modernization becomes a tool for managing the environment. It is a theory of restructuring the ecology. It is a theory of eco-restructuring with a right kind of managerial approach. In that sense, ecological modernization emphasizes more on environmental management rather than on the process of production. So in that sense, ecological modernization believes that with right kind of management or with right approach to environmental management, pollutions can be tackled, environmental degradations can be solved, or environmental problems can be handled. So basically, what ecological modernization therefore argues is that environmental problems like pollution, environmental problems like water crisis, environmental problems like deforestation, these require specific policy changes, these require specific governance interventions. So therefore, instead of focusing on physical aspects of environmental degradation, instead of focusing on physical aspects of environmental problems, ecological modernization theory emphasizes on the process of governance. Ecological modernization theory emphasizes on the process of eco-restructuring through environmental management. So in that sense, it emphasizes on environmental improvement through different state policies as well as through initiatives by the private sector. And that perhaps becomes more important, more unique about ecological modernization theory, that it is not just a theory which emphasizes only on the state, it also emphasizes on the private sector, on the industry, or on capitalism. In that sense, ecological modernization considers private or considers the private sector or the capitals or considers the industries as carriers of ecological restructuring. Because these policies that will be formed, these new technologies that will be formed, ultimately it is these industries, these capitalists or these entrepreneurs who will be using these technologies, who will be governed by these kind of policies. So in that sense, private sector becomes champions of environment, private sector become friends of environment rather than polluters of environment. Because it is this private sector which will be ultimately be governed by the rules which are framed for ecological restructuring, which are framed for ecological reforms. So in that sense, private sector plays an important role, and private sector is considered as carriers of reform, because the reform processes will be carried forward, will be implemented through these private sectors, through this industry. So in that sense, ecological modernization theory emphasizes on industry, ecological modernization theory emphasizes on private, ecological modernization theory emphasizes on economic enterprises, and it believes that these private sector or the private elements, they are the carriers of reforms. The fourth way in which you can understand applications of ecological modernization theory is as a program of environmental improvement. As I told, that ecological modernization is not just a theory, it is a program. Like modernization is a program, modernization is a specific program of economic intervention. Similarly, ecological modernization is also a program of specific economic interventions. It is a program of specific economic interventions, program of specific way of dealing with industry. But what makes ecological modernization different from that of simple modernization, from that of industrial modernization, is that ecological modernization begins with ecological restructuring, in the sense that instead of focusing on environmental problems, instead of focusing on curing environmental problems, what it emphasizes on preventing environmental problems. So therefore, emphasis here is on prevention rather than curing environmental problems. And for preventing environmental problems, ecological modernization demands that a specific program of modernity, specific program of modernization should be prepared which will take care of environmental degradation. So, and that can be possible only when we start working from the design stage itself, rather than thinking, rather than contemplating on effects of industrialization, on impacts of industrialization on pollution. So in that sense, modernization, ecological modernization propagates a new way of modernity. Ecological modernization propagates a new way of environmental improvement through or working through the designing stage itself. In that sense, ecological modernization is a political agenda for action. It is a political agenda for action because it specifies that industry states should behave in a particular way, should manage environment in a particular way. In that sense, ecological modernization understands, or ecological modernization emphasizes that priorities should be given to ecological considerations at the designing stage of technology, at the designing stage of industry, rather than understanding industry as a creator of pollution, rather than understanding industry as a producer of pollution. Ecological modernization theory looks at industry in a different way. It looks at industry as a carrier of environmental reform. And how industry can be a carrier of environmental reform? Only when industrial technologies, or only when industrial production is designed in such a way that it pollutes less, that it degrades environment in a limited manner. In that sense, ecological modernization theory is not just a theory. What I am trying to argue is that it is not just a theory, but it is also a process of governance, it is also a process of eco-restructuring, and it is also a program for political action. It is an agenda for political action. And as Martin Hager has told, or as Martin Hager points out, ecological modernization is also a narrative. It is a discursive narrative, it is a discourse with which certain kind of policies are put forth, with certain kind of policies are implemented. Okay, having understood the basic applications of ecological modernization theory, let us understand why ecological modernization became so popular. If you see the broad range of theories that is available, or theoretical discussions available in environmental sociology, we can understand that ecological modernization theory in the last few years, or in the last decade, has emerged as the most popular theory explaining the environment, society, state synergies, or the relationship between state, private and environment. So in that sense, why ecological modernization becomes so popular? Besides the theoretical arguments, or besides the knowledge that comes from the ecological modernization theory, there are certain external factors which makes ecological modernization theory so much popular in the academic circle, or in the environmental sociology. We may understand ecological modernization theory as a befitting response to some of the problems that emerged during the late 80s or in early 90s. So in that sense, ecological modernization theory can be considered as an effective response to the rising environmental movements, radical environmentalism and new social movements of 1970s and early 80s. We all know that 1970s and 80s are known as the decade of movements. Several environmental movements emerged during this time, several new radical environmental ideas emerged in this time, and all these radical environmental ideas, or all these environmental social movements, points out towards one thing, that certain radical restructuring has to be done for the society, that without certain radical steps, without certain fundamental alterations of the production system, we cannot manage the environmental pollution. Or in other words, environmental pollution or environmental degradation requires that certain radical steps be taken. These radical steps can be demodernization, can be reducing your modernity, reducing your growth process, slowing down your growth, probably halting your process of industrialization. So in that sense, these environmental movements pointed towards an apocalyptic situation where survival was considered as at threat. So in that sense, ecological modernization theory challenges this kind of understanding of social reality, and ecological modernization theory came out with a phenomenon that situation is not so problematic, situation is not so it came out with an understanding that we don't need drastic radical restructuring of the production process. Rather, what is required is certain reforms in the process of governance. So unlike those radical environmentalism which demanded deindustrialization or halting the process of industrialization or slowing down the growth process, ecological modernization emphasized rather on higher industrialization, higher levels of industrialization, super industrialization, or investing more and more on technology, investing more and more on infrastructure and industry. So in that sense, ecological modernization was a befitting response towards the rising environmental movements which was trying to put a pressure on private, which was trying to put a pressure on capitalist industrialization, and where industrialization or economic growth was considered as opposite, as antithetic towards environmental conservation. So ecological modernization comes out with an idea that environment and economy are not necessarily opposite, and therefore it gave a befitting challenge to this rising environmentalism, and it gave a befitting challenge to the radical environmental ideas that emerged in 1980s. Secondly, ecological modernization was also a befitting response towards the increasing ideas or towards the increasing influence of the notions of sustainability and sustainable development. If you see the post 1980s developments in environment and development, we realize that sustainable development emerged as an important idea. And sustainable development, especially after the Brundtland Commission report, sustainable development became the dominant strategy of development, became the dominant strategy of environment and development restructuring. And sustainable development emphasized again and again on recycling. It emphasized again and again on renewable resources. But ecological modernization tried to argue this or tried to counteract this argument, and it provided a model, it provided a template for transformation of the metropolitan regions of the industrial nations. So according to ecological modernization theory, while sustainability and concept of sustainable development are more important, are more applicable in the third world regions or in the developing regions, perhaps there is certain problems, or perhaps there is certain shortcomings in sustainable development argument so far as modern industrial advanced countries are concerned. So in that context, ecological modernization theory provided an alternative to sustainable development for the advanced industrial nations or for the metropolitan regions of the industrialized countries. That what is required in these industrialized countries is settling or is fixing the technology or fixing the governance process. So in that sense, ecological modernization gave a response to the rising arguments, to the rising influence of sustainable development as it has emerged in the developing countries. So ecological modernization provided a parallel model. It provided a parallel model to that of sustainability. Like sustainable development was important for the developing countries, ecological modernization pointed out that ecological modernization perhaps is the answer in the advanced modern countries or in the industrialized advanced modern countries. So ecological modernization perhaps is the only way with which ecological restructuring or ecological improvements can be brought forward. The third reason for which ecological modernization became so much popular in academia or in environmental sociology is that it provided again a befitting response to the North American dominance in environmental sociology. As we have discussed in this course till now, that environmental sociology emerged in the North American academic discourse, and it is the North American environmental ideas that guided or that dominated for a few time in environmental sociology. So it is the ideas of Dunlap and Catton which remained important, which remained significant in the larger theoretical debates in environmental sociology. And what kind of ideas Dunlap and Catton portray? Dunlap and Catton tries to portray an idea where we should work with the idea of the new ecological paradigm. And new ecological paradigm asks us to understand the limits of ecology, or new ecological paradigm provides a theoretical framework to investigate the question why environmental degradations emerged as a serious problem. So in that sense, the American debate in environmental sociology has revolved around understanding the causes of environmental degradation, understanding the factors that lead to pollution, factors that lead to environmental degradation. Whereas ecological modernization theory, emerging from the academic soils or from the academic circles of Western Europe, tries to provide a model to deal with the environmental problems or to find the environmental problems. In that sense, ecological modernization theory is a challenge to the American dominance in environmental sociology, because the American theoretical debates or the American ideas of environmental sociology emphasized more on finding causes of environmental degradation, finding explanations of environmental degradation, while ecological modernization theory provides a model for reforms, for improvements in environmental conditions. In that sense, ecological modernization theory provides a befitting response to the American ideas of Dunlap and Catton's environmental sociology, or for that matter, Alan Steinberg's the treadmill of production. Because while both treadmill of production or the theories of Dunlap and Catton, the new ecological paradigm of Dunlap and Catton emphasized on explaining causes of environmental degradation, ecological modernization theory emphasizes or it focuses more on finding solution to these problems. If it focuses more on dealing with these problems, tackling these problems, or coping with these problems. In that sense, ecological modernization theory emerged as a response to the American dominance in environmental sociological literature. So to conclude this part of the lecture, we may say that ecological modernization theory, which emerged in the European academic circle, became quite popular over the years to emerge as a full-fledged theoretical debate in environmental sociology, which focuses more on ways and means to deal with environmental problems and the kind of reforms that is required, the kind of changes that is required to deal with these problems. In that sense, ecological modernization theory is a perspective which discusses synergies between state which synergies between the state, the private, the economy, the state, the private, the environment and society. So to conclude this module, we may say that the central point of ecological modernization theory is the synergy, is the synergy between the state, the private, the society and the environment. It talks about the kind of reforms that is required, talks about the kind of restructuring that is required to deal with these kind of environmental problems, to solve these kind of environmental problems.